White cops mock black girl in court, shocked to learn she's a USG NIU's attorney in disguise. In a bustling courthouse on a rainy Monday morning, two arrogant white police officers openly ridicule a quiet black young woman they believe to be powerless and out of her depth. Whispers and muffled laughter ripple through the courtroom, fueled by unspoken biases. Little do they know, this seemingly unremarkable girl has a secret that could turn their world upside down. Behind her demure expression lies a brilliant legal mind, one shaped by an Ivy League education and sharpened by relentless dedication. By the time she's finished dismantling their testimony, the shocked officers will realize they've underestimated the wrong person. Danielle Cole tapped her foot nervously in the corridor of the Brooklyn Supreme Court. The early morning light filtered through tall windows, illuminating dusty rays across the marble floors. People hustled by attorneys cradling heavy case files, defendants darting wide-eyed, and uniformed officers eyeing them all with practiced indifference. But Danielle remained motionless, letting the steady flow of humanity pulse around her. She smoothed her neatly pressed charcoal grey skirt, the only outward sign of the formidable intellect she possessed. At just 27, Danielle had already earned her law degree from Harvard Law School, interned at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and recently completed a Special Department of Justice Fellowship under none other than then Attorney General Loretta Lynch. She was recognized as one of the country's brightest legal minds, a genius attorney, as her law professors once dubbed her. Yet she had chosen to keep that identity under wraps for the moment. Why the secrecy? Because Danielle wanted to understand the system from the inside out, unfiltered, without the shield of her titles or connections. She'd seen far too many defendants railroaded in courts across the nation, especially young black men and women who lacked money or clout to defend themselves. So she came here, voluntarily disguising her true background and stepping into the role of a pro se litigant in a small civil matter. Her plan was to observe, document, and quietly measure the subtle biases at play. It wasn't about deceiving the court. It was about revealing how deeply prejudice could shape outcomes, even in a city as diverse as New York. Because once Danielle made her real credentials known, she worried any impartial study would be impossible. The system would treat her differently, out of fear or respect. Now, though, she was just another face in the crowd. She clutched a worn leather satchel containing carefully prepared documents, procedural motions, transcripts, and detailed notes from her research. Today, she'd watch a hearing in which two police officers were testifying in a misconduct case. The plaintiff, a young man who claimed excessive force during a routine traffic stop. The officers, a pair with a reputation for aggression. Danielle wanted to see how the justice system reacted, who was given the benefit of the doubt, who was dismissed, and how far prejudice might tip the scales. As she approached courtroom 4B, her heart fluttered with excitement and anxiety. She adjusted her thick-framed glasses, part of her understated persona. In truth, she didn't need them, but they helped her blend in as a bookish, possibly naive onlooker. Inside, the air smelled faintly of furniture polish and old paper. People spoke in hushed tones. The judge's bench loomed at the front, draped with the state seal. Attorneys shuffled their notes at counsel tables. Two uniformed white police officers sat together, leaning back with casual arrogance. They were mid-conversation, ignoring the plaintiff and his lone attorney. Danielle slid into a row near the back. She recognized the officers' faces from her research, Officer Craig Marsh and Officer Dustin Bennett. Marsh had thinning blonde hair and a perpetual smirk. Bennett was stockier, with a shaved head and a hawk-like stare. Both men had been named in multiple citizen complaints, but none had ever stuck. As Danielle watched them laugh quietly, she felt a prickle of unease. A bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, the Honorable Helena Vasquez, took the bench, The plaintiff's lawyer made an opening argument about the humiliating stop and frisk his client had endured, allegedly motivated by race. Meanwhile, Marsh and Bennett whispered and chuckled, showing no sign of remorse. Danielle resisted the urge to glare. Then it was time for the officers to testify. Marsh took the stand first. Exuding confidence, he recounted a version of events that painted the plaintiff as agitated, combative, and a threat to officer safety. The plaintiff's counsel tried to challenge him on specifics: why no dashcam footage was produced, why Marsh's incident report contained conflicting details, but Marsh deflected. He offered explanations that felt rehearsed. Next, Officer Bennett hopped up. He was even more cavalier. "We had reason to suspect a weapon," he declared. "He reached for his waistband. We had no choice but to restrain him." His voice was a bored monotone, as if none of this was unusual. Danielle's brow furrowed as she took copious notes. From her vantage point, the case hinged on uncorroborated police testimony versus the plaintiff's word. The entire scene reeked of bias, some intangible undercurrent in the judge's reaction, the prosecutor's questions, and the officer's willingness to stretch facts. She could almost feel the weight of injustice. Finally, a short recess was called. Marsh and Bennett swaggered off the stand, exchanging fist bumps as if they'd just scored a victory. The plaintiff, by contrast, slumped in defeat. Danielle felt a pang of empathy. "I can't intervene," she told herself. "Not yet. I'm only here to observe." But unbeknownst to her, Marsh had noticed her scribbling and whispering with the plaintiff's side during a break. He elbowed Bennett, nodding discreetly at the slender black woman perched in the back row. A smug grin spread across Bennett's face. Later, when the judge left for recess, the two officers sauntered down the aisle, heading straight for Danielle. She froze, heart rate spiking. "Stay calm," she reminded herself. "You here for the clown show?" Marsh asked with a sneer. "Looks like you're buddy-buddy with that liar and his attorney." Danielle looked up at them, maintaining a neutral expression. "I'm just an observer, taking notes." Bennett chuckled. "You aiming to be a paralegal or something, girlie? That it? Don't get your hopes up. People like you always think they can waltz in here and outsmart the system. Doesn't work that way." Danielle forced a polite smile. "Noted. Thanks for the advice." Something in her eyes must have irked Bennett. He leaned in, voice low. "You're not a real lawyer, that's for sure." Could be a glorified assistant, a little girl playing dress-up. Anger flared inside Danielle. She bit her tongue, resisting the urge to reveal her credentials. She wanted to blow their minds with her resume: Harvard Law, top of her class, licensed attorney in multiple states, special counsel to the Department of Justice. But if she did that, her experiment and her plan would be compromised. Instead, she stayed silent. Marsh smirked. "Go on. Keep scribbling. You won't change a thing in this system." With that, they strolled off, leaving Danielle's heart pounding. She closed her notepad. "They have no idea who I am," she reflected, frustration and determination welling within her. But one day they might find out. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. But sometimes fate had a way of forcing revelations. That evening, Danielle retreated to her modest rental apartment in Crown Heights. Stacks of legal journals and case files littered her small living room, remnants of her ongoing research. She brewed a cup of chamomile tea and replayed the day's events in her mind: Marsh and Bennett's haughty laughter, their dismissive remarks, the powerless frustration she felt. She sank onto the couch and opened her laptop, ready to type up her field notes. Danielle was compiling a personal study on systemic biases in law enforcement testimony. Eventually, she planned to present her findings to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice quietly, behind closed doors. She expected some pattern of questionable testimony, but Marsh and Bennett's arrogance was galling. A text notification lit her phone. It was from her longtime mentor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Neil Rosen, a seasoned civil rights litigator. She had confided in him about her undercover approach, though he wasn't entirely comfortable with it. He supported her passion. "Neil, how's the project going? Heard you sat in on a rough hearing today." "Danielle, yes." Two officers, Marsh and Bennett, used questionable tactics. They mocked a plaintiff, claiming racially motivated force. Also mocked me for taking notes. A pause before Neil replied, "Be careful. They have a reputation. Word is they're connected to a broader pattern. Don't draw attention to yourself." Danielle sighed, typing back, "Got it. Will keep my head down." But unbeknownst to her, the wheels of fate were already turning. The next morning, the local news ran a brief segment about two alleged bad officers in Brooklyn, referencing Marsh and Bennett. The story recounted multiple lawsuits filed by minority citizens claiming harassment and brutality. Usually, these suits got buried. But a local investigative journalist, Ebony Morales from the New York Times, had started digging. She released an article detailing how Marsh and Bennett's testimony had exonerated them from numerous complaints. Patterns of contradictory statements were found, yet the court often sided with them. Marsh and Bennett, furious at the swirling negative press, doubled down on their hostility toward anyone they deemed a threat. And thanks to Danielle's presence, her note-taking, her quiet interest in the plaintiff's side, they considered her a threat too. By midweek, Danielle discovered that her every visit to court was shadowed by Marsh's suspicious glare or Bennett's attempts to intimidate. They'd pass by with snide remarks like, "Hope your little friend is ready for jail," or "You better watch who you team up with, sweetie." Danielle pretended not to hear, though it set her nerves on edge. Meanwhile, her quiet observations continued. She witnessed how easily prosecutors accepted the word of these officers, how often the defense attorneys were outgunned or outmaneuvered. She saw the plaintiff's frustration at the dismissal of valid evidence. It all reinforced her initial thesis that structural bias and an over-reliance on police testimony often overshadow true justice. But as she delved deeper into Marsh and Bennett's records, Danielle stumbled upon a puzzle, a series of older cases where entire sets of evidence had been lost or misfiled. In each instance, the complaints vanished before any disciplinary action could proceed. The same pattern repeated enough times to raise alarm bells. She confided her concerns to Neil over the phone, voice trembling with anger. "They're unstoppable, it seems. The court, the precinct, no one wants to cross them. They're mocking the system." Neil's response was measured. "Danielle, this is bigger than you. The best thing we can do is gather evidence meticulously. Don't let them push your buttons." Easier said than done. She recalled Marsh's mocking grin, the quiet girl. "You're in over your head," he'd whispered earlier that day. If only she could reveal who she truly was. Danielle Cole, Esquire, the so-called genius attorney who'd authored briefs at the highest levels of the DOJ, who'd mentored under famed civil rights lawyer Sherilyn Ifill, who'd argued key motions in federal court. But that revelation could hamper her entire research plan. She decided to keep playing the role of an unassuming observer, at least for now. Yet each day, the tension escalated. Marsh and Bennett's hostility ramped up, especially after Ebony Morales' investigative piece gained traction. One afternoon, after a particularly tense hearing, Danielle found them waiting near the courthouse exit. Bennett blocked her path while Marsh towered behind him. "You journaling about me, sweetheart?" Bennett asked, feigning friendliness but dripping with menace. Danielle gripped her notepad. "I have the right to take notes. This is a public hearing." Marsh spat on the ground. "You keep messing around in business that's not yours. You'll end up in a world of hurt. Some advice? Mind your own." Then they walked off, leaving Danielle shaken. How far would they go to protect their reputation? she wondered. If Danielle had learned anything in her short but intense legal career, it was that bullies often rely on intimidation to hide their shortcomings. But she was no easy victim. She'd stand her ground, even if it meant stepping out of her carefully constructed disguise sooner than planned. The following week, Danielle's low-profile approach was tested as never before. It started when Ebony Morales published a second installment of her expose, detailing new allegations against Marsh and Bennett. She cited unnamed sources, claiming the officers routinely falsified reports and doctored evidence. One piece included the story of a teenage boy who was arrested on a fabricated gun charge only for the charge to evaporate when the family threatened to sue. Marsh and Bennett, Ebony wrote, had contributed to the police report. The public outcry intensified. Protesters picketed outside the 77th precinct, demanding accountability. Marsh and Bennett responded by doubling down on aggression. According to Courthouse Whispers, they threatened Ebony Morales with a defamation suit, claiming her articles were fake news. Right in the middle of this firestorm, Danielle, still outwardly just a court observer, found herself in an unexpected position. She'd begun assisting a pro bono attorney, Harold Bryant, who was representing yet another alleged victim of Marsh and Bennett. Bryant was overwhelmed by the volume of claims, so Danielle quietly offered research and administrative help, like a volunteer, she told him, never revealing her own bar certification. She simply said she was a legal researcher, and Bryant, desperate for help, welcomed her. That day, Danielle was in the library annex behind the courthouse, scanning old dockets and referencing case law. She wore her typical disguise, a conservative skirt, sensible heels, and those thick framed glasses. She combed through old trial transcripts, searching for patterns in Marsh and Bennett's testimonies. She uncovered repeated references to unidentified informants and spontaneous confessions, all suspiciously consistent across multiple cases. Soon, she had enough for a preliminary pattern of misconduct memo. She planned to hand it to Harold Bryant. This could help him mount a stronger defense for his client, she thought, and help the judge see the bigger picture. Lost in focus, she barely noticed the man stepping into the annex corridor. Only when he cleared his throat did she look up. It was Officer Marsh, leaning casually against a bookshelf, arms folded. Heart pounding, Danielle tried to maintain composure. Officer Marsh. What a surprise. "Yeah," he said, scanning the quiet library hallway. "I heard you've been snooping around old records. You sure are persistent for someone who claims to be just an observer." His tone was casual, but his eyes were cold. Danielle forced a friendly smile. "I'm allowed to do legal research in a public courthouse." "Unless there's a problem?" he shrugged, stepping closer. "Problem depends on whether you're feeding false narratives to that journalist or those shady lawyers. People like you ruin good cops' reputations." Danielle bristled. "No one's trying to ruin reputations, only seeking the truth. I assume that shouldn't scare you if everything's above board." Marsh's eyes flashed with anger. "Careful with that mouth, girl." He gestured at the stack of transcripts. "You're prying into things that don't concern you. If you keep it up, maybe I'll find a reason to arrest you for interfering in an investigation." "I've done it before." A chill rippled through Danielle. She had no illusions about how easy it could be for a cop to manufacture probable cause. Countless stories told her so. Still, she refused to cower, threatening to arrest me for reading public records. "That's interesting." Marsh's lip curled in a sneer. "Just remember, people like you can't hide behind a fancy lawyer when you're no one. The judge might not care. The system stands with us, not you." Danielle swallowed her retort. She needed to get out of there before the confrontation escalated. Grabbing her papers, she brushed past him. Marsh muttered something under his breath, an expletive-laced threat. She walked faster, heart pounding. Out on the street, she felt the warm summer sun on her face, but it offered no comfort. This was more than a personal vendetta. Marsh and Bennett had become emboldened, feeling threatened by the swirling media coverage and lawsuit, and they sensed Danielle was part of the movement to expose them. Over the next day or two, Danielle faced repeated intimidation tactics. Sometimes she'd notice a squad car parked outside her apartment building. A few times, her phone rang late at night, only for the caller to hang up when she answered. She couldn't prove it was Marsh or Bennett, but the timing was suspicious. Finally, Harold Bryant, oblivious to Danielle's personal predicament, asked her to attend the next hearing for his client, a victim pressing charges against Marsh and Bennett. The officers would be testifying again. Harold needed someone to take notes and gather real-time observations, especially on the cross-examination. Danielle hesitated, fear gnawing at her. But then she pictured the frightened eyes of the teenage boy from Ebony Morales' article, or the battered face of the plaintiff she'd seen earlier. She thought of the hundreds of others who lacked a voice. If she didn't stand up, who would? She agreed. However, a quiet voice in her mind reminded her that she wasn't just an ordinary legal researcher. She was Danielle Cole, licensed attorney and recognized prodigy, a woman who had once argued successfully in federal court. If Marsh and Bennett pushed her too far, if the system turned a blind eye, she would not remain disguised for long. The day of the big hearing arrived under an ominous grey sky. The courthouse brimmed with tension. Reporters lingered near the entrance. Activists carried signs, and police presence was heavier than usual. Marsh and Bennett had become the focal point of the building's gossip. Everyone wondered if this hearing would prove them guilty of misconduct, or if they would wiggle free once again. Danielle arrived early with Harold Bryant, who carried a thick folder of discovery documents. His client, Marcus Dixon, was a soft-spoken man in his early 30s who claimed Marsh and Bennett assaulted him during a routine stop in front of his own home. The prosecutors were reluctant to bring charges against the officers, so Marcus had filed a civil suit. Today's hearing was to determine whether enough evidence existed to proceed with the suit, or if it would be dismissed. The courtroom hummed with low voices. Marsh and Bennett strutted in, uniformed, exuding confidence. They spotted Danielle seated at Harold's table, notepad in hand. They exchanged a knowing glance and smirk. Here we go again, Danielle thought. Judge Alicia Davenport, an African-American woman known for her sharp intellect, presided. Danielle hoped that Davenport's reputation for fairness might counter any undue bias in favor of the police. Once the formalities concluded, the hearing commenced. Harold Bryant presented evidence. Sworn affidavits from bystanders who saw Marsh and Bennett throw Marcus to the ground without provocation, photographs of bruises consistent with assault, and radio dispatch logs that indicated no suspicious activity was reported when they arrived. Danielle took notes, meticulously documenting the judge's reactions and the cop's body language. When it was the officer's turn, Marsh took the stand first, wearing a polished facade of sincerity. "We suspected Mr. Dixon was engaged in possible drug activity," he began. He matched a description from a tip we received. Harold cross-examined. "And where is this tip documented?" Marsh shrugged. "We got it verbally from an informant. Didn't have time to record it." A ripple of disbelief went through the gallery. Danielle tensed. "Here we go, with the phantom informant again." Harold pressed. "Yet the dispatch log shows no mention of a tip." Marsh looked unfazed. "We had to move quickly. Sometimes standard protocols fall behind in urgent situations." Next, Bennett took the stand, echoing Marsh's story. He claimed Marcus made aggressive movements and that they had to defend themselves. No mention was made of the bruises or the fact that multiple witnesses saw no aggression from Marcus. When Harold questioned Bennett about the use of force guidelines, Bennett retorted with a slight laugh. I know how to do my job, counselor. I don't need a lecture from some low-rent attorney. The hush in the room crackled with tension. Judge Davenport frowned, cautioning Bennett to maintain decorum. Harold resumed. Did you identify yourselves as police before initiating physical contact? Bennett rolled his eyes. Of course. He resisted anyway. The entire testimony reeked of fabrication. Danielle noticed how Marsh and Bennett's timelines contradicted each other on small details, like how long they were on the scene before confronting Marcus. She scribbled notes, anticipating how to highlight these inconsistencies. Then, in a startling turn, the police's attorney, a stern man named Richard Groves, called Danielle to the stand. She froze in shock as the clerk announced, "Miss Danielle Cole?" Harold spun to her in confusion. She had not planned on testifying. Groves, wearing a smug grin, stated, "We believe Miss Cole has been feeding biased narratives to the press and to Mr. Bryant. We want to question her involvement." Danielle's stomach lurched. If she got on that stand, her identity might become a lightning rod. But refusing could look suspicious. Harold objected. "Miss Cole is not a party to this case. She's a volunteer legal researcher. This is harassment." Judge Davenport looked at Groves. "Relevance, counselor?" Groves adjusted his tie. "Her so-called research goes beyond neutral observation. We suspect she encouraged witnesses to lie about my clients. She's also frequently in contact with Ebony Morales of the New York Times. This might be an attempt to smear the officers in the media." Danielle's anger flared. She had never told a single witness to lie, and while she had shared general observations with Ebony Morales, that was hardly smear campaigning. Still, she felt a trickle of fear. If forced to testify, would the entire court discover her real background? Judge Davenport glanced at Danielle. "Miss Cole, is any of that true?" Danielle shook her head firmly. "No, Your Honor. I haven't told any witness what to say. I'm not engaged in a media smear. I only gather publicly available information." Davenport fixed Groves with a hard stare. "You haven't shown actual evidence that Miss Cole orchestrated false testimony. This feels like a fishing expedition." Objection sustained. "She won't be testifying." Relief coursed through Danielle. She caught Marsh's glare from across the room, though. He mouthed something like, "We'll get you," his expression venomous. She realized that her refusal to be intimidated was pushing them toward more desperate tactics. The hearing resumed, with Harold systematically exposing minor contradictions in the officers' timelines. Judge Davenport listened, brow furrowed. By midday, she signaled for a lunch recess, stating she needed time to review the evidence and reconvene in the afternoon. As the courtroom emptied, Marsh and Bennett again sought out Danielle. This time, they cornered her near the water fountain. Marsh leaned in, voice low. "Running from the stand, huh? Maybe you're hiding something. People who dig into our business usually regret it." Danielle's pulse hammered. She was sick of their intimidation. Enough was enough. "I'm not hiding anything except my patience for bullies," she shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. Bennett scowled. "Watch your mouth, or next time you'll regret it. We can make your life miserable." In that moment, Danielle considered revealing everything. Her law license, her top-tier credentials, her direct lines to powerful people at the Department of Justice. Let them see who they were threatening. But before she could speak, Harold approached, and the officers backed off with sneers on their faces. She turned to Harold, chest tight. "They're trying to bury the truth," she muttered. "But they're sloppy. They lied on the stand." Harold nodded. "I know. Let's just hope the judge sees through it. We'll present final arguments after lunch." "You've documented the contradictions, right?" Danielle lifted her notepad, a sense of resolve settling over her. "Maybe I can use my hidden skills to help Harold deliver a killer cross-examination. This hearing could be the turning point that exposed Marsh and Bennett's pattern. And if not, Danielle might have to unmask herself to protect the course of justice. After lunch, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Judge Davenport announced she would allow each side 15 minutes for final statements before deciding if the case would proceed to a full trial. Harold asked Danielle if she had any final insights from her notes. They quickly huddled by the gallery seats. "I found direct contradictions in Marsh's and Bennett's statements," Danielle whispered. "They can't agree on the time they arrived. Marsh said 2:45 p.m., Bennett said 2:30. The dispatch log says 3:05. Harold's eyes lit up. "That's a potential bombshell. Let's highlight that contradiction." The hearing resumed. Harold strode to the lectern. "Your Honor, these officers rely on their testimony alone, lacking verifiable records or consistent timelines. For instance, Marsh testified they arrived around 2:45, but Bennett said 2:30. The official dispatch log shows 3:05. That's a glaring inconsistency. Either they're mistaken or lying." He continued, referencing witness affidavits that contradicted the officers' claims of aggressive behavior. He concluded with, "These repeated discrepancies demonstrate a pattern of falsehood, urging the court to let this lawsuit go to trial rather than dismissing it. The people deserve to see the truth come to light." Richard Groves took the podium, trying to dismiss the time issue as small memory lapses. But it was clear he was flustered. Marsh and Bennett exchanged uneasy glances. Judge Davenport took several minutes to review her notes. The courtroom was silent, tension coiling. Finally she spoke. "In light of contradictory police testimony, I am inclined to allow this case to proceed to trial. There is sufficient cause to question the officer's account." A murmur of relief and excitement rippled through the gallery. Marcus Dixon exhaled, tears of gratitude forming. Marsh and Bennett muttered curses under their breath, shooting daggers at Danielle and Harold. The bailiff called for order as Davenport hammered her gavel to close the session. The courthouse burst into chatter. Marsh and Bennett stood near the exit, scowling. Marcus's supporters, including Ebony Morales, hurried to congratulate him and Harold. Danielle hovered, feeling a surge of triumph tempered by caution. "We won the first step, but what now?" She was soon approached by Ebony Morales, the reporter. A tall woman with braided hair and sharp eyes, Ebony wore a press badge around her neck. "So you're the quiet researcher everyone's talking about," she said, smiling. "I've seen you in court. Good job uncovering those contradictions." Danielle nodded shyly. "Just doing my part." Ebony patted her arm. "Keep it up. We might expose these two for good." Then her tone darkened. "Be careful, though. They're not shy about intimidation." Danielle felt a wave of foreboding. Sure enough, as she stepped outside the courtroom, Marsh and Bennett blocked her path once more. The corridor was quieter now, few witnesses around. Marsh's voice oozed contempt. "Nice trick in there. You think you've won something?" She tried to sidestep, but Bennett grabbed her arm. "You're messing with the wrong people," he growled. Fear and anger flared in Danielle's chest. "Let go of me," she hissed. "You have no right." Bennett tightened his grip, ignoring her. Marsh leaned in. "We know you're not just a random bystander. People talk. Some folks think you're a bigger fish than you pretend." Danielle's pulse slammed in her ears. "They suspect." She tried to wrench free. "If you assault me here, cameras are everywhere. Are you that foolish?" Marsh hesitated, scanning the corridor. Then he and Bennett stepped back. Marsh jabbed a finger in Danielle's face. "Don't push it. Stay out of our business, or we'll show you what a real takedown looks like." They stormed away, leaving Danielle trembling but uninjured. Ebony Morales, who witnessed the tail end, hurried over, outraged. "I got that on camera." "They grabbed you!" Danielle steadied herself, heart pounding. "I'm fine. Let's just go." She needed to process this. Ebony looked incredulous, but followed her down the hall. Inside, Danielle seethed. She'd come to observe the system's flaws, not provoke bullies. But Marsh and Bennett had escalated it. They suspected her of being more than meets the eye. If they discovered her real identity, her status as a practicing attorney in multiple jurisdictions, would that deter them or make them lash out worse? She was no longer certain. However, one thing was clear: they were growing desperate, threatening physical violence to silence her. She was done playing docile. If cornered again, she wouldn't hold back. Perhaps it was time for the brilliant Harvard-educated lawyer in her to step into the light and let these officers know exactly who they were dealing with. The next morning, a tense hush hung over Danielle's apartment. She sipped coffee while scanning her phone. Social media was ablaze with discussions about the prior day's hearing. Ebony Morales had posted a cryptic tweet about a silent heroine who helped keep the Marsh-Bennett case alive. The mention triggered speculation among local activists. Who was this hidden figure? Danielle set her mug down, mind racing. I can't hide forever. She had no illusions that her safety was guaranteed. Marsh and Bennett had proven willing to use intimidation or worse to protect themselves. She decided to call Neil Rosen at the Point U.S. Attorney's office, her mentor and confidant, and explain the situation. Minutes later, Neil answered in a hushed tone. Danielle, I've been hearing rumors that you've become a target of those officers. Are you safe? She hesitated. I'm shaken but not hurt. They confronted me physically, and they suspect I'm not just a random observer. Neil let out a frustrated sigh. I told you not to get too close, and they have a lot of local connections. They've manipulated the system before. Why not come in under official DOJ capacity now? We can request federal oversight. Danielle closed her eyes. I wanted the real, unvarnished perspective, but we've reached a point where that might be dangerous. Let me think about how to reveal myself in a way that helps the cause. Neil paused. Are you sure you're ready? Once you go public as a Department of Justice affiliated attorney, the entire dynamic changes. The cops, the court, the press, it'll become a circus. But if it's the only way to protect yourself and keep this case from being buried, it might be worth it. Danielle's voice steadied. I'll do it for the greater good. The system's failing. Marsh and Bennett prey on that. I'll coordinate with you on the official steps, but I suspect the unmasking might be more dramatic if it happens in court. By midday, she had a plan. She'd accompany Harold Bryant and Marcus Dixon to the next procedural hearing, where a date for trial would be set. She'd confront Marsh and Bennett if they tried to intimidate her again by revealing her credentials. The press, Ebony Morales, and presumably the judge would witness it. That might ensure the intimidation was documented and taken seriously. She only hoped it wouldn't cause too much chaos. A real name for reliability to lend authenticity to the story, Danielle decided to reference her time working under Preet Bharara, the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, widely recognized for his stance on corruption. She had briefly interned in his office during law school. Mentioning that name in court would likely resonate with local officials who knew Bharara's tough on corruption reputation. With everything set, Danielle tried to calm her nerves, reminding herself she was no stranger to high-stakes legal battles. She recalled the day she delivered an oral argument in a moot court competition at Harvard, receiving a standing ovation for her mastery. If she could handle that, she could handle this. The following week, the courthouse was more crowded than usual. Word had spread that Marsh and Bennett would appear again regarding pre-trial motions, and Ebony Morales had teased major developments in her ongoing coverage. Protesters, supporters, and the curious public crammed the corridors. Harold Bryant, Marcus Dixon, and Danielle arrived together. Marcus's face shone with cautious optimism. He carried new medical documentation indicating the severity of injuries inflicted by the officers. Danielle carried a sleek black briefcase, this time her old companion from Harvard, sporting a small DOJ pin inside. In the corridor outside courtroom 5A, Marsh and Bennett stood with their attorney, Richard Groves. They noticed Danielle immediately. Marsh's eyes narrowed, and Bennett whispered something, chuckling. Danielle steeled herself. The hearing commenced. Judge Davenport was present again, listing the housekeeping matters for the upcoming trial. Groves tried to push for a delayed trial date, citing insufficient time to prepare. Harold countered that justice delayed was justice denied. Danielle quietly observed, awaiting the right moment. Ebony Morales hovered in the gallery, phone at the ready. Then it happened. During a pause, Marsh rose from his seat, speaking out of turn. Your Honor, we request the removal of certain volunteer researchers from counsel's side, specifically Miss Cole. She's interfering, inciting negative media coverage. Judge Davenport frowned. Officer Marsh, you know better than to speak out of turn, but let me address that. Miss Cole is not on official record as counsel. Is she simply a paralegal or volunteer for Mr. Bryant? Harold started to respond, but Danielle stood, voice steady. Your Honor, if I may clarify. She moved to the center of the courtroom, feeling all eyes upon her. Marsh smirked, expecting to see her squirm. Instead, Danielle drew herself up. I am Danielle Cole, and I am not just a volunteer. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of New York, among others, and a former Department of Justice fellow under U.S. Attorneys Preet Bharara and Loretta Lynch. A hush fell. Groves blinked in astonishment. Marsh and Bennett exchanged stunned glances. Ebony Morales snapped a photo from the gallery. Judge Davenport lifted an eyebrow. Is that so? You're an attorney, Miss Cole? Danielle continued, voice resolute. Yes, Your Honor. My bar number is 5,603,982. I've been quietly observing to gather information about patterns of misconduct, specifically in cases involving these officers. The reason for my discretion was to witness the system's unguarded behavior, free from the influence of official titles. But in light of repeated harassment, I feel compelled to reveal my credentials and stand with Mr. Bryant as co-counsel in Mr. Dixon's case, if the court permits. Stunned murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some spectators stifled gasps. Ebony Morales' lips curved into a triumphant smile. She'd suspected Danielle was more than meets the eye, but not to this extent. Judge Davenport nodded slowly. I see. Well, Miss Cole, you're free to join Mr. Bryant's team if he consents. Mr. Bryant. Harold, eyes wide with surprise and relief, stammered, Absolutely, Your Honor. Miss Cole's assistance would be invaluable. Davenport rapped her gavel. So noted, Miss Cole is recognized as co-counsel. Now, regarding the officer's objection, she glanced at Marsh and Bennett. It seems Miss Cole is entirely within her rights to participate. Marsh's face reddened. Bennett looked furious. Your Honor, he blurted. She misled us, the court, everyone. Davenport's gaze was icy. Officer, Miss Cole had no obligation to announce her credentials while volunteering. Unless you can cite a specific violation, your objection is overruled. Groves tried to salvage the moment. We request a continuance to adjust our approach, but the judge shook her head. Motion denied. We proceed as planned. Danielle returned to her seat, heart pounding with adrenaline. Marsh and Bennett stared at her in slack-jawed shock. They had mocked her, threatened her, ridiculed her as a powerless black girl. Now they realized she was a well-connected, Ivy League-educated attorney with the potential to dismantle their fortress of lies. She met their eyes with a calm, steady gaze. Try bullying me now, she thought. In the hallway afterward, Ebony Morales raced up. Danielle, that was incredible. Are you able to comment on your time at the DOJ? Danielle managed a polite but firm response. I prefer not to overshadow Mr. Dixon's case. But yes, I do have federal experience, and I'm committed to seeking justice for those harmed by police misconduct. She left it at that, politely refusing further queries as reporters clamored. Meanwhile, Marsh and Bennett stood off to the side, fuming. Marsh hissed to Bennett, "She's got to be lying." "We never heard of her." Bennett, sweat beading on his brow, looked unsettled. "Check her bar status. She might be the real deal." Their shock turned to simmering rage. They exchanged a glance of mutual understanding. If they lost the Dixon case, more lawsuits would follow, and their reputations, and possibly their freedom, would be on the line. They retreated without another word, but Danielle knew the war had escalated. She'd unmasked herself, which meant the next showdown would be bigger than either side ever anticipated. In the days leading up to the trial, Danielle's life was a whirlwind of depositions, strategy meetings, and media speculation. She officially joined Harold Bryant's small firm, thus removing any question about her standing. The phone rang constantly with new potential plaintiffs wanting to file suits against Marsh and Bennett, or reporters seeking details. Danielle hammered away at the case, using her trademark analytical brilliance. She discovered new cracks in the officers' stories, like an internal memo from the precinct that contradicted their claim of an informant tip. She and Harold also uncovered a pattern of nearly identical language in the pair's prior reports, suggesting they recycled excuses to justify stops and searches. Marcus Dixon, once hesitant, now found renewed hope. He told Danielle tearfully, "I can't believe you're helping me. The system always felt rigged. Maybe this time it'll be different." Danielle promised they would fight tooth and nail. Meanwhile, Ebony Morales continued her coverage, unveiling how Marsh and Bennett's unit had historically faced minimal oversight. She even found an interview with a retired sergeant who admitted that complaints against them were often lost. Public sentiment turned against the officers, and calls for accountability grew louder. Marsh and Bennett, for their part, refused to go down without a fight. Rumor had it they were meeting with high-priced lawyers paid for by the police union, planning a scorched earth defense. Danielle expected them to rely on personal attacks, claims of political motives, or that outside agitators were fueling the lawsuit. One afternoon, Harold shared a rumor he'd heard. "They might try to pin something on you, Danielle, like forging documents or bribing witnesses. They want to shift blame. Maybe they'll claim your personal vendetta is behind these allegations." Danielle pursed her lips. "Let them try. They'll find I'm squeaky clean. Every piece of evidence I have is legit. I'll keep thorough documentation in case they attempt to frame me." Still, she felt a quiver of anxiety. Marsh and Bennett had proven capable of intimidation. Would they attempt actual violence if cornered? She updated Neil Rosen at the DOJ, who assured her she had backing if things escalated. "We're ready to step in if they cross a line," Neil said. Yet, Danielle knew lines could be crossed quietly, in dark alleys or falsified police logs. She took precautions, varied her routine, installed a security camera at her apartment, and always kept a friend or colleague nearby when traveling to the courthouse. As the trial date loomed, the city's eyes turned to the Marsh-Bennett fiasco. The gravity of the case went beyond Marcus Dixon's allegations. It symbolized the broader fight against systemic police misconduct. The defense team, led by Richard Groves, signaled they'd mount a fierce battle, painting the officers as victims of a smear campaign orchestrated by radical activists and an overzealous new attorney. Danielle braced for a trial that could alter the city's landscape of accountability. Marsh and Bennett had once mocked her openly as a powerless black girl. Now they'd face her in open court, a top-tier, cunning legal mind ready to challenge every thread of their fabricated stories. Finally, the trial began. Spectators packed the courtroom, the front rows reserved for press, activists, and supporters. Judge Davenport oversaw the proceedings, her stern presence commanding respect. Marsh and Bennett sat at the defense table, each sporting a combative expression. Their lawyers flanked them, stacks of documents at the ready. Harold handled the opening statement for Marcus Dixon, describing the humiliating assault. Then Danielle stood to outline the evidence of repeated dishonesty in Marsh and Bennett's conduct. She spoke with clarity and passion, referencing specific incidents and the patterns they revealed. The jury watched her intently. In the gallery, Ebony Morales typed notes furiously, capturing every word. When it was the defense's turn, Richard Groves tried to tear down Marcus's credibility, calling him unemployed and implying past minor offenses indicated a propensity for resisting police. Then he moved on to Danielle, describing her as a young attorney with an agenda. He alluded to her activism and her ties to the DOJ, suggesting she was launching a personal crusade. Danielle swallowed her annoyance, waiting to respond with evidence rather than emotion. The trial progressed with witness after witness. Some neighbors testified they saw Marsh and Bennett slam Marcus against a car without provocation. The officers produced their own set of witnesses, mostly questionable individuals who gave contradictory accounts. Midway through, Marsh took the stand, his calm demeanor barely masking underlying anger. He insisted Marcus had threatened him verbally, made gestures that indicated a weapon. When Danielle cross-examined, she meticulously dismantled his timeline. She introduced dispatch records, radio logs, and internal precinct memos that contradicted his claims. Marsh squirmed under her methodical questioning. Finally, she pulled out a typed version of one of Marsh's old reports from a separate case, where he claimed a suspect also reached for the waistband with fidgeting hands and seething expressions. She had a near-identical statement from the Marcus case. "Officer Marsh," she asked, "do you commonly describe suspects in the exact same words, or is that a coincidence?" Marsh's eyes flickered with panic. I might have a standard approach to documenting incidents." A faint ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Danielle pressed on, pointing out inconsistencies. Marsh's frustration rose. He snapped at Danielle, "You're twisting my words." The judge had to warn him to remain respectful. Next came Bennett's testimony, which Danielle dissected with equal precision. She cornered him on the alleged tip that triggered the stop, forcing him to admit there was no official record. She also highlighted the discrepancy in times. The jury members exchanged glances, sensing a web of lies unraveling. By the trial's third day, Marsh and Bennett's once cocky aura had crumbled. The defense attorneys scrambled to salvage their case, but the weight of evidence was crushing. Then a bombshell dropped. Ebony Morales had obtained an internal precinct email showing Bennett bragging about teaching someone a lesson minutes after Marcus's assault. This email, though partially redacted, was admitted into evidence. The defense tried to exclude it, but Judge Davenport allowed it, stating it showed potential motive or mindset. Marsh and Bennett glared at Ebony, who sat near Danielle, scanning the email. Danielle introduced it to the jury. Officer Bennett wrote these words, "That punk needed a reminder of who's in charge around here." Doesn't sound like a legitimate policing tactic. It sounds like retribution. Bennett stammered about stressful conditions and locker room talk, but the damage was done. When final arguments arrived, Danielle invoked the ideals of justice. No one is above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it. This isn't about demonizing police, it's about accountability. Marcus Dixon was brutalized and lied about. Officer Marsh and Officer Bennett show a pattern of deception. We ask you to deliver justice by finding them liable. The defense tried to paint the cops as brave men under constant threat, urging the jury not to let anti-police sentiments cloud judgment. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 2 days, tension thick in the air. Marsh and Bennett avoided eye contact with everyone, their bravado gone. Finally, the verdict. They found Marsh and Bennett liable for excessive force and violations of Marcus Dixon's civil rights. The court awarded Marcus substantial damages, and the judge referred Marsh and Bennett's conduct to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Pandemonium erupted. Applause burst from the gallery. Ebony Morales rushed to capture the moment. On the defense side, Marsh and Bennett stood in disbelief, faces pale. They had once laughed at the little black girl they thought was powerless. Now they faced personal and professional ruin, undone by the very system they believed they controlled. Danielle exhaled, relief and triumph flooding her. She locked eyes with Marcus, who mouthed, "Thank you." Harold clapped her on the back, beaming. The courtroom was alive with cheers, tears, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, justice could prevail. In the aftermath, the fallout for Marsh and Bennett was swift. Their precinct launched an internal affairs investigation. District attorney investigators weighed criminal charges for perjury, conspiracy, and assault under color of law. Public outcry demanded they be fired immediately. The police union distanced itself, blaming individual lapses. Meanwhile, Marcus Dixon's victory emboldened other victims. A flood of lawsuits and complaints poured in against the two officers, citing patterns eerily similar to Marcus's case. Marsh and Bennett, once smug in their untouchable status, faced the very real possibility of prison. As for Danielle Cole, the story of her undercover approach made headlines. Ebony Morales published a feature, The Hidden Harvard Grad Who Exposed Corrupt Cops. It detailed Danielle's journey from quiet observer to unstoppable legal force. Interviews with her mentors, including references to her stint under Preet Bharara, highlighted her extraordinary legal mind. Some commentators criticized her for initially concealing her role, while others praised her cunning strategy to reveal the raw biases in the system. Harold Bryant's small firm grew in reputation overnight. They took on more civil rights cases, with Danielle at the forefront. She juggled her role as lead counsel in new lawsuits, coordinating with the Department of Justice to compile a broader crackdown on police misconduct. One sunny morning, Danielle strolled out of the Brooklyn Supreme Court building, a sense of peace washing over her. Ebony Morales caught up to her, microphone in hand. "Danielle, the public wants to know. What's next for you?" Danielle smiled warmly. "Continuing the fight for equity and justice, Ebony. This city and this country still has a lot of work to do. I plan to use my voice, not just in court, but in policy discussions, training programs, anything that breaks down these systemic failures." Ebony nodded, scribbling notes. "Any regrets about how everything played out?" Danielle paused thoughtfully. "I regret that so many victims had to suffer before real action was taken, but I don't regret uncovering the truth in the way I did. If Marsh and Bennett had known who I was from day one, they might have covered their tracks more carefully. This outcome is a testament that intimidation and prejudice can't stand forever." The wind rustled leaves along the courthouse steps. In the distance, activists chanted for further reforms. Danielle gazed at them, heart swelling with purpose. She recalled how Marsh and Bennett once laughed at her, certain she was a powerless nobody. Now they'd tasted the bitter fruit of their arrogance, true hard karma. And for Danielle, she had found a renewed calling, forging a path that melded her brilliance with relentless compassion. The system she once analyzed from behind thick framed glasses now felt the weight of her influence. As she stepped forward, a swirl of camera flashes and applause followed, but Danielle focused only on the horizon, on the countless other battles waiting to be fought, and won for those who had no voice. Thank you for joining Danielle Cole's incredible odyssey, from quiet courtroom observer to triumphant attorney, unmasking the cruelty and deceit of two corrupt officers. Her story shows that while racism and arrogance may flourish in the dark corners of the justice system, they crumble when confronted by brilliance, tenacity, and integrity. Every prejudice-laced laugh, every dismissive insult, Danielle turned them into catalysts for truth. If you were moved by her unwavering courage and inspired by the power of justice prevailing over intimidation, please like this video, share it with others who need this spark of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine a light on resilience and righteousness. Together, we can champion real change and ensure that no one is ever underestimated or oppressed because of who they are. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice begins when we decide to stand up.